Hey everybody, it's Alex Miller at Capnion here. Today I'd like to give some basic facts about a data breach at 23andMe, but mostly I'd like to dig into a little bit into these categories of cybercrime and talk about how your behavior as a consumer might protect you or put you or somebody else at risk. So I'll begin with the basic facts, and maybe even I'll cherry pick the basic facts a little. On Friday last week, 23andMe, which is a mail in genetics testing company, announced they had a data breach. And initially, it was announced that only 14,000 people, which is a small fraction of their customers, was affected. So, first takeaway for consumers, for you, this was a credential stuffing attack. And that's basically you were in some other data breach. And maybe that data breach wasn't important, but they got your username and password for who gives a Nowheresville website that it's not a big deal if they get into. This is more dangerous a lot of the time than you would think because a lot of people reuse passwords. So, finding number one, don't reuse your password. I'll come back to this, but all this data ends up for sale on the dark web. So if you're a hacker, you'll buy a big database of people's usernames and passwords, and you'll try them on another website. And this is exactly what happened with 23andMe. Some bad guys had a huge database of usernames and passwords from somewhere else. And then 1% of them worked, and they got into these 14,000 people's accounts. It was revealed in the past 24, 48 hours, the situation is considerably worse than what was revealed this past Friday. And this is another common story. It can trickle out over time as people figure out just what happened. The situation sometimes is worse than at first blush. And in this 23andMe case, very classic cyber attack kind of story. They had access to these 14,000 accounts. And it turned out that this impactfully gave them access to essentially social features that 23andMe has. And in particular, you can do this thing where you're looking for long lost relatives and you're trying to build out your family tree. And this involves comparing genetic information with other users, sharing genealogical information with other users. And the criminals that were into these 14,000 accounts got a whole lot of information on almost 7 million more users by essentially leveraging the access that these beachhead accounts from credential stuffing provided them. So finding number two, even if you're kind of a nihilist and you don't GAF about what happens with your cybersecurity, potentially, if you're not using good practices, you get to put other people at risk as well. And that's what happened here. And this is a very common story with successful cyber attacks of you get a little bit of access and then you can kind of tunnel sideways and then get a little bit more. No different here. So these 7 million people, they're in a bad place because a lot of data got lost. Birthdays, locations, information about your family tree and who you're related to, which once again could get them in trouble. If we look at this credential stuffing attack, we can guess at how this might put people in further danger. So first off, when you call the bank, it's very common they're going to ask you stuff about family members' names. And it's supposed to be the story that only you know that. But for these 7 million people at 23andMe, now that information is available on the dark web getting collated with other stuff. So on the margin, that puts a lot of your security questions out there at risk. So finding number two, when you're involved in these things, you want to know and you want to get clean house afterwards, if not before. So if you were caught up in this and your security question was about your mother's maiden name, well, maybe it should be about your first pet now, because your mother's maiden name is about to be public on the dark web forever. And that's not something that's going to change. A little bit more arcane. In the time I've been making videos about data breaches, smart people, acquaintances of mine have shared their adventures getting caught up in scams. Scams, they seem easier to avoid than they are. And when they get you, there's going to be an element of emotion and or exploitation of your attachment to your existing relationships involved. So you can see how this 23andMe hack that's going into this genealogical stuff really puts you in a lot of extra danger because, and here I'm just speculating. It should be noted, I think different people in that 7 million lost different amounts of stuff, and it's very textured. Maybe before you were going to get a phishing call and it was going to be very vanilla, give me this money now. Well, maybe they have information about you have some weird disease and they have a very specific surprise medical bill narrative that's going to scare the shit out of you and you're going to make a bad decision to pay. Or maybe they're going to have very specific information on a sick relative. Or all these things combine for, why do hackers want this stuff? Well, one reason they want it is because it's raw material for more hacking. And to sum up, if you were caught up in this, that's pretty serious. In general, it would be good if you were changing your passwords. In general, it would be good if XYZ. In general, it would be good if you were cool-headed when you got a strange phone call, someone asking for money. If you've been caught up in these things, you unfortunately have to prioritize being vigilant now because there's a lot of things in life, either officially at the bank or sort of informally in our relationships, where somebody showing up with the right specific information means we have to trust them and send the money or whatever it is. And criminals exploit this. Hacks like this make it a lot easier for them to exploit it. So I hope that's helpful to somebody out there. If you were caught up in this, I would pay attention to it. This one is really bad for the specificity of the kind of health information and information about relationships that's contained in it. And I guess keep watching the story. It's already come out over the course of a few days, and it was worse than advertised.